The two Germanys agree we can be one Germany soon. Mr. Mandela calls for vote, reform, calm and order. Labour tells Mrs. Thatcher, you should be in prison. The fishermen who say they suffer from the polluted sea. And the eye and the stump that's better than any batsman's. Good evening. The leaders of the two Germanys agreed today that their countries will soon be one. The West German Chancellor, Herr Helmut Kohl, said unity is finally possible. And the East German Prime Minister, Herr Hans Modrow, said unity is drawing nearer. They started work on uniting their currencies. The four wartime Allied powers, the United States, Soviet Union, Britain and France, are likely to meet the two Germanys to set the terms for unification. The European Commission wants all the community powers to meet.
Hans Modrow, the East German leader in the West German capital Bonn today. It's the sheer speed with which the two Germanys are coming together which is driving so much else now. Today, for example, Herr Modrow talked to Chancellor Kohl about the possibility of the two countries joining their currencies and their economies together. They stopped short of actually deciding to do so, but Chancellor Kohl did say that a joint commission would start work on the idea. Such decisions like that and the constant stream of East Germans driven westward by their country's economic collapse, in effect the reunification which is already taking place, that's the motor behind the moves towards a summit. What's at stake is the reunification of the two halves of Germany that were separated by World War II. What's not at stake is a return to the pre-war Greater Germany. That included large areas of modern Poland and even a slice of the Soviet Union. Today, the reunification of Germany means taking West Germany's 62 million people, Europe's most prosperous country, skilled workers here earn £1,200 a month, and joining them on to their poor cousins. The 16 million East Germans will be outnumbered and outspent. Here a skilled worker earns £420 a month. At Downing Street tonight, where Mrs. Thatcher is giving a dinner for the Polish Prime Minister, she'll talk in a few moments about German unification almost as a foregone conclusion, but will add it is vital that it should uphold, not weaken, Europe's stability and security. So, Mrs. Thatcher will continue, it must be very carefully worked out in full consultation with Germany's allies and neighbours. But which allies and neighbours? Well, Berlin, surrounded by East Germany, half of it virtually part of West Germany, but all of it still run by the four victorious World War II allies, Britain, France, the United States and the Soviet Union, has provided the British and it seems the West Germans with the idea of a summit framework. And at a big international security conference in Canada today, where those same allied powers and East and West Germany have been meeting, the British Foreign Secretary has been pushing hard the idea of a six-nation summit.
We are quite close to an agreement on procedure, an agreement on meetings of the two Germanys and the four powers to discuss those matters which fall naturally within the scope of such a meeting. This strikes me as an admirable and common sense procedure. If agreed, and we're waiting for the final agreement of Moscow, if agreed, it will provide what the British government has long pressed for, namely a framework for such discussions.
All of that will be on the agenda when Mrs. Thatcher meets the West German Foreign Minister, Mr. Genscher, here in London tomorrow, as will the problems about bringing East and West Germany back together again. Will there be Western troops in East Germany now, as well as Eastern Bloc ones? Or should there be no troops there at all? Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
The Kirov crane works in Leipzig employs 2,500 people and exports to 25 countries. But like other East German factories, it's losing skilled workers as East Germans continue to migrate to the West at the rate of 2,000 every day.
The loss of our skilled workers is having a very negative effect, but we are trying to maintain at least a low level of production.
The shortage of skilled workers is putting the already fragile East German economy under increasing pressure. If the exodus to the West continues at its present rate, the economy could collapse.
Enterprises in cities all over East Germany are feeling the effects, but the brain drain is most acutely felt in the hospitals. Wards lie empty as more doctors and nurses leave the country. In Bitterfeld, East Germany's most polluted industrial town, factories now fly the West German flag. Workers here say only West German money can pay to clean up and modernize.
We think only a unified Germany will solve the terrible pollution. For Bitterfeld, it's almost too late.
Many East German factories are already preparing for German unity. This loss-making works in Leipzig makes parts for the Trabant car. They're setting up a joint project with West Germany's Volkswagen.
We expect financial and technical cooperation with Volkswagen to produce a new German car.
Many other East German factories are also trying to attract West German capital investment. Leno Glaser, News at 10, Leipzig.
Nelson Mandela has returned to the home in Soweto that he last saw nearly 30 years ago. 100,000 people gathered in the Soccer City Stadium to welcome him back, and thousands more blocked the roads outside. His message was uncompromising. They must be disciplined in the fight to end what he termed the dark hell of apartheid. Trevor MacDonald is in Soweto.
Good evening from Soweto, the town to which Mr. Mandela returned today, as he almost promised he would. Tonight, he's at home, surrounded by family and friends, having had a home-cooked dinner and some sparkling wine. But that came at the end of an intensely political day. Today, Mr. Mandela told his supporters where he stood, and he spoke to them as an elder statesman would. He talked about the end to township violence, and he called on his people to reassure white South Africa. And to a cheering, emotional crowd, he said, "Let discipline be our guide, let education be our weapon in the struggle for freedom." Kevin Dunn followed Mr. Mandela's extraordinary day.
From early morning, they poured onto the streets of Soweto to welcome Nelson Mandela home. Clinging to anything that moved, they streamed from the township to see and hear for the first time the man who for them is the father of the nation. More than 90,000 people crammed into South Africa's biggest sports stadium to see their dreams of his return become reality. Long before his arrival, a celebration carnival was already underway. Once he appeared, the welcome was tumultuous. And so the leader, lost to generations, at last paraded before his people. Finally, they heard the voice silenced for so long. Mr. Mandela's message was of moderation, urging his followers to maintain discipline and rid the townships of violence.
The hijacking and setting alight of vehicles and the harassment of innocent people are criminal acts that have no place in our struggle. We condemn that.
He then pointed the way forward.
Go back to your schools, factories, mines and communities. We are going forward. The march towards freedom and justice is irreversible. I have spoken about freedom in my lifetime. Your struggle, your commitment, and your discipline has released me to stand before you today. Africa! Africa! Hallelujah! Amandla!
The message was left ringing across Soweto to those two who'd waited outside his tiny township house. It was the end of a long road home. Once there, the emotion of a man grown old in prison came through.
We have now reached 70 years. We can't have many years left before we close our lives. But because of the support and inspiration that you have given us, we will all sleep permanently with a smile in our face.
This then is the moment Soweto has waited 27 years to see. Nelson Mandela at last is home. Inside the house he last saw in 1962, Nelson Mandela finally savoured the company of friends and of family, and savoured above all the pleasure of simply being back home. Kevin Dunn, News at 10, Soweto.